And in a sense, our fortunes are linked to the dictates of those who lend or have the capacity to influence lending. These are, of course, the multilaterals led by the IMF, but supported by other institutions like the World Bank and the IADB. And so paying down the debt shouldn't be brushed aside as a trivial matter. It is an essential and core conditionality of moving forward, and certainly a conditionality of the IMF agreement. But also, passing these IMF tests are crucial to our future economic prospects, because if you don't, you are likely to be in a situation where you're isolated. And so the legislative and other menu of reforms enclosed in this IMF agreement does have the capacity to introduce, to my mind, some sense of sanity, perhaps correction of our past economic improvements. And that should be underestimated. At the same time, it is also important that the government understands that the IMF conditionality may be necessary, but not sufficient to achieve the job creating economic growth that we must view as a national priority for our people in the short, medium, and long term. The truth is, Jamaicans are feeling the pinch. The impact of government spending cuts and less than desirable private sector investment to create the jobs necessary for economic well-being. Jamaicans have now become, in a sense, victims as opposed to the beneficiaries of the political run-with-it mentality. Between devaluation and limited government-sponsored community projects, times are hard and likely to get harder. And Jamaicans, the average man on the street, the average Jamaican, the average community is feeling the impact of these challenging times. My hope is that when the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance and the opposition leader and spokespersons on the opposition side comes to the country over the next few weeks and beyond that in the sector, they do not focus their announcements and intentions on the IMF and the need to pay down the debt. Because in a sense, that is a given. I don't think we can avoid it. And when the JLP was there, they had to do it. Now the PNP is there, they are doing it. So there's no need to make a big issue out of that. Instead, in tangible terms, they should tell the country how they are going to, or how they would, in the case of the opposition, fast-track the confidence and facilitation to inspire investments and growth for the benefits of the people of Jamaica. The country no longer wants to hear, I think, about the need for sacrifice. They know what sacrifice is. They have been making sacrifices on a continuous basis. Neither do they want to hear too much about who is to blame. Yes, there's a role for criticism, but the blame game, people are somewhat turned off and tired of it. In case we missed it, they are blaming the system and those of us who have administered that system over the last 40 years. That's a typical sentiment out there on the streets. Hence the apathy, the withdrawal from the process. And so when the speakers approach the podium for their budget presentation, the Jamaican people are looking, from my vantage point, for hope, a light at the end of the tunnel. They want to hear about the opportunities that exist for investment and growth, and who or what can get them there in the fastest possible time. That's their relief. So the budget, to my mind, is going to depend on content. That is what will separate the ordinary, routine, mundane from the extraordinary, thinking out of the box, progressive, new idea approach. In my view, we must shift, or certainly seek to shift, the psyche of the budgetary process from making sacrifices to pay debtors, pay those we owe, to efficient management to facilitate growth and opportunities. It's an important shift because it speaks to a mindset, it speaks to a mentality, and it speaks to a work program with particular focus. We need sacrifice specifics, I think. We need targets. We need timelines for efficient investment in use strategies. Jamaica, in a sense, needs a dose of pragmatism and leadership that thinks out of the box to move the country. Unemployment is defined based on a minimum number of work time engaged. And those persons who are working age population who decide not to seek employment are not part of the unemployment data. Unofficial statistics suggest that youth unemployment, 35 years, between 16 and 35, is as high as 35%. And all of you are out there on the ground, so you should know that it's not so easy to find jobs. So it's a lot worse than what the official data says. That's the point I'm making. It seems to me that if we're going to transform our economy while we pay down this debt, live true to this IMF agreement, we must also see a priority of getting detached, unemployed young people back in some sort of training or retraining to prepare them for that job market. Such a program must be skills-based, but also focus on discipline and entrepreneurship. You know, I have a difficulty, I'm an educator myself, because I think our education system has some challenges in terms of how it's structured. I don't think people should leave the education system so much looking for work. We need to start encouraging people to think creatively about creating something of value. And that's just one of the areas that I think more emphasis should be focused on. So, in terms of recommendation, I would say to the government, we need to look at some sort of national retraining initiative. The time has come, I think, for unemployment benefits also, very important, which includes crash programs, to use a political parochial term, for the unemployed and underemployed to be converted into training and retraining initiatives. I would prefer, and I think the country would be better for it, to pay an unemployed youth to learn a skill that is demanded by a job market and to appreciate the benefits of positive attitude towards work and discipline than to provide that youth with relief through short-term, non-productive endeavors. And the fact is that in the past, that's what crash program type jobs, short-term jobs are. You pay a man to do a little bushing, not much supervision, you're really just giving him money to eat a food. It has no long-term impact and benefit. The new dispensation that we see, I think, requires greater challenges, greater approach to that challenge. Finally, the current environment that we're in is harsh, as I said earlier. And some of us are better able to deal with that than others, because we are not equally yoked in terms of our economic status in life. That's just the nature of our societies. So there has to be a formula to dealing with those who are most vulnerable as we seek to move our way out of this debt trap. In all this, there are going to be citizens of the country who, due to no fault of their own, are impacted most severely by an anemic economy and contraction in government-induced economic activities from borrowing. These are primarily the very young, the old, the disabled, and the socially detached. We have to spend a little more time. This is a softer feature. It has economic implications, but not immediately identified with economics. We have to find a way as a society to demonstrate compassion for those who are vulnerable. Where that compassion can rehabilitate, it should. Where it is just preserving a life, it should. In addition, government and our multilateral partners should recognize that when the vulnerable becomes extremely vulnerable, it also has significant economic impact because it threatens social dislocation and unrest. Thankfully, we have not had that to date, even though I believe the environment could easily facilitate that. And so economic stability, the stability that this program supports and promotes, requires a social safety net to deal with those who are vulnerable. And that is intended, of course, to ease the pressure for the economic adjustment to be given a chance to work. Between those Jamaicans living below the poverty line and those from dysfunctional families and circumstances, government has a responsibility to show that compassion. Now, the PATH program, which in the budget or estimates of expenditure was announced to be increased by 15%, is intended to offer that, the core of that social safety. But PATH has its limitations, and there are limitations we need to accept. PATH is dependent on means testing as to who qualifies, who is eligible. And that means test, which is international in terms of its approach, has margins of error and requires verification and correction. In this regard, my own view is that there is an opportunity in the challenge that we see to engage a wider cross-section of the society in a more deliberate way to deal with those that are vulnerable. It requires communication, it requires leadership, it requires understanding, but there's an opportunity there for some sort of consensus around those who are vulnerable. Now, there are a host of groups in the society, including the Rotary Club, that are involved in some sort of outreach for vulnerable groups. But I think it could be perhaps a more coordinated national initiative, given that we are supposed to be in this thing together. We try to do it when it comes to at the very macro level in terms of social partnership and partners for progress and so on. And I'm saying there's a role there, an idea that needs to be developed to deal with that. I for example, think of the church. They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm sure you've heard that. But it takes a village also to care for the old and the vulnerable. In a sense, sometimes you have to step back to reconsider your position and your options. And I think it's my right to exercise that option, and that's what I'm going to do. But thank you for the concern. If I choose to re-engage, I will come and see you.
Thank you. VP David.
Talking about the hub, I noticed you have mentioned it before.
The what, sorry?
The hub. Logistics hub.
Oh, the logistics hub. Okay. This has been talked about for some time. The former, as part of the last cabinet, last administration, the former Minister of Transport and Works, Mike Henry, spent quite a significant time trying to advance its development. I'm sure it would have been spoken about even probably before his time. But I recall, him having copious notes about linking Jamaica into this sort of network. It's an important concept, it's a good concept, because Jamaica does have some advantages in providing that particular service. Obvious ones being geographic proximity that connects north to south, deep sea harbor, 7th deep sea natural harbor in the world, etc., etc. So the issue is, how do you take advantage of that? Concepts are great, we're not short of ideas, the issue is the implementation. And it is being talked about more frequently, as you know. And as a consequence, if it can be materialized, I think we should support it. And I don't think there's there's certainly no difference of view in terms of the political directorate as to the benefits of establishing that. Where you may have differences, and I'm not on the inside now, so I can't speak fully for the Labour Party, but where if there are differences, maybe differences of how you implement, scheduling of implementation, where you put what effort. In Mike Henry's case, for example, he was very big on Burnham Field as a central area, airport, etc., etc. The government of the day has chosen to at least to start somewhere else. So you may have those differences and those can be debated, but I think there's general consensus around it.
You incorporate that into, say, a component to national youth service, for example.
You know, I've warmed a lot to that idea, frankly speaking, over time, for the last 5 or more years. Because I think that for a number of reasons, we have seen significant breakdown in basic core discipline within our society. And the sense of volunteerism and service is not nearly as prevalent as it were when I was a youngster, where there was a lot of value on that. And I think these are worthwhile values to promote. The sense of industriousness, work, the value of work, etc. In a sense, we are influenced a lot by external environments, and there has been a breakdown in that type of discipline. So I felt, for example, that maybe in the final few years of high school, secondary school, there should be some sort of community-based program as part of the curriculum, which requires some sort of engagement that are outside of the academic bookwork. And some schools do it, by the way. My daughter, for example, at St. Andrew's High, where she went to Camden, had to do some hours of community work. She went to the vet every Saturday for a number of weeks to help the doctor to perform procedures. Now, and she got credits for that. I think that should be institutionalized because I think it may be necessary. I think, for example, the Army plays is an example of significant discipline, I think. And I think they have periodic and specialized programs, outreach programs for dysfunctional young people. I think they could play a role. You could pull those critical agencies together, which includes some of the non-academic agencies, and design a program that's not intrusive, overly intrusive, but helps a growing mind to develop in a particular way that could be good for them later on, but also good for the society in terms of collective responsibility.
Wouldn't it be nice to send them to critical areas in the society and have them work for a year and get a credit on that, of just that, maybe to teach them how to be really humble?
Right. 7% of the budget is devoted to capital projects. It appears that private sector entities are willing to engage in big projects in order to spur growth in the economy. What do you see as major growth projects that the government could undertake in the short run and in the long run to spur and galvanize society in moving forward?
All right, thank you. In terms of the first question, you're basically asking if a student with a loan from the SLP could get that loan effectively paid for by doing voluntary service.
Not all of it, a portion of it.
A portion of it, right. And it's a good concept. The challenge is, of course, that the loan is a revolving loan, and if you get credit against your payment, you have to replenish the loan after a while, right? So it would have to be carefully structured because it is supposed to be a self-sustaining fund. And what I would probably recommend, which I think would be more appropriate, I think, and more self-sustaining, is to use these graduates in enhancing the efficiency of the public service or critical services in the society, where they give value, and that value is equated to at least a portion of the loan paid for by the government. I mean, we're already a fairly bloated public service. I think 9% of our GDP is paid for by is supporting of public service employees, or 12, I think. So part of that way forward is to reform that process. So it has to be very carefully managed. But the only concern I have with the volunteerism is what would happen to the loan over time. I suspect that would be expressed like The second one about government stimulating investment. You know, that part of the challenge with that, sir, is that government sometimes engage in investments for the wrong reasons. Ultimately, an investment has to have some sort of return. And if it's a negative return, then it is subsidized. Ultimately by you and I, by the way, right? And you know, the sugar industry, for example, which the government sold and reacquired, and I was intimately involved in divesting the second time around, was taking up, in the last couple of years, when I was minister, it consumed about $50 million of subsidy to maintain the 7,000 people who are working here. Now, it's not to take away from the importance of the jobs of those 7,000 people, but ultimately somebody has to pay, and it's shared by all of us. Here in Jamaica is the same thing, very emotional, sentimental, but it was consuming 70 million subsidy every year, US. So I would approach it a different way. I think government can go a very far way in encouraging the operationalization of investment. I think there are sufficient investors who have ideas and willing to invest. I am involved with investors who are willing, have access to resources, plans, but they have to wait a year to get an approval. But that's in the hand of the government. That's the government machinery at work or not at work. And so I would say, as I said in this presentation, take those projects that are ready and commit, I'd say 3 months. I must get an approval 3 months. Make that an agenda, one item of the cabinet over the next year or two. You'd be surprised to know how many of those things will flow through the pipeline. And it has implications for jobs, which we all are seeking. Thank you very much.